Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Sorry, but my mom's in the audience, and I want to just say, Mom, I did nothing and I got an applause. So, good afternoon. My name's Aaron Espinoza. I have the distinct privilege of being the director of the Library and Observatory as well as our Writers Festival, so thank you. Before we begin, we do it every event. Please silence your phone. That includes your alarms, any timers, anything that might go off during this event. Please turn it off. Have to start the afternoon by just always saying a quick thank you to our visionary founder, Jamie Kabler. The festival, nor this Writers Festival, or the Writers Series, would be able to be done without his leadership, his support, his mind, and the chaoticness that comes with who are we going to bring to each and every Writers Series event. So thank you, Jamie. Very special thank you to Jordan Snitcher, our sponsor for the Writers Series. We are happy to announce that Jordan has already agreed to fund next year's Writer Series, so we will be back next season. So in addition to Jamie and Jordan, the sponsor or the leadership of our city council, we have Mayor Pro Tem Lynn Mulatto, Council Member Michael O'Keefe, and Council Member Steve Downs. Thank you for your leadership. How many of you today knew that it was National Library Week? Okay, I got a handful. I'm a little disappointed I didn't see more hands. We sent out an e-blast. In addition to that, today is actually National Library Worker Day. And I want to, thank you. I want to offer a heartfelt thank you to our remarkable staff here at the Rancho Mirage Library and Observatory. Oh. Their talent, creativity, and commitment to excellence are the reason we're able to host events like this and serve our community in so many meaningful ways. Please join me in welcoming and giving them a deserved round of applause. I'm going to show a quick video on what National Library Week means to the Rancho Mirage Library.
You can learn from biography books.
You can learn from biography books. Right now she's into Amelia Earhart, so.
I'm Deanne Deagle, Senior Librarian at the Rancho Mirage Library and Observatory, and we're celebrating National Library Week. National Library Week is the time where we celebrate libraries and all that we do and offer to our communities. National Library Week was first started in 1958 by the American Libraries Association as a way to raise awareness for libraries and celebrate and support our communities.
They're just really important pillars where people can come to learn, study, and it's always safe and quiet here.
Libraries mean so much to our community these days. We're a community space. We provide computer access free of charge. We are a space to just be and exist without having to spend any money, in addition to access to materials of all kinds on all subjects for everyone.
This library has become a tremendous resource for us. I've seen everything from cooking demonstrations to authors to it's never ending. I've seen movies here.
If you'd like to find out more about our library and how we're celebrating National Library Week, please visit ranchomiragelibrary.org. We hope everyone celebrates libraries not just this week, but every week.
So I know a lot of you are snowbirds that live in here, that are here today. Please, whether it's our Rancho Mirage Library and Observatory Foundation or whether it's your local library at home, please support them. They need the support as much as they can today. I'll leave it there. Sorry. If you were not able to get one of your free books, we do apologize, but our partners in Follett Book is in the back there, and we'll have books for sale afterwards. And then Mr. O'Keefe will be signing books after his talk today over at our podium. But again, we all ask that you all please line up along this wall until we can get people out safely. And now on today's main program. We're thrilled to welcome Edward O'Keefe, author of The Loves of Theodore Roosevelt, The Women Who Created a President. It's a fascinating exploration of powerful women who shaped one of America's most iconic leaders. Moderating today's conversation is Justice Doug Miller, a longtime friend and supporter of the Library and Writers Festival. Please join me in welcoming Justice Douglas Miller and Edward O'Keefe.
Thanks very much, Aaron. Thank you. Hello. Hello.
So good afternoon.
Good afternoon. It's a pleasure to be here with you.
Welcome to the desert.
Thank you. Well, and thank you to be here on National Library Week. How about our librarians? Thank you to Aaron and Deanne and the wonderful Jamie and Debbie, and to you, Doug. This is phenomenal. And Madam Mayor, I like the sound of that. Almost as good as Councilman O'Keefe. That one caught my...
So I first wanted to start out because in some sense, this is a sad day. I've had a great time interviewing people at the Writers Series. I think I did 2 or 3 before Christmas and 3 after Christmas. And this is a wonderful program. But I love all of you. You guys are enthusiastic. You're knowledgeable. So I'm sad in some sense because it's the last one, although the best one.
Save the best for last.
That's exactly right.
That's what Jamie told me when he called.
That's exactly right. So I want to jump right into the book because this book's wonderful. You're a fabulous writer. This is a great story. But I just wanted to ask a couple of general questions first. Before we talk about the loves of Theodore Roosevelt, but there seems to be something about Theodore Roosevelt. There seems to be an allure. There seems to be a fascination with him that exists even today, just when you mention his name or talk about him. Have other people told you that?
Well, he's phenomenally culturally relevant. I mean, LeBron James puts "In the Arena" on his shoes before every game. Miley Cyrus, who's probably going to be at Coachella, has got a tattoo of his most famous speech on her arm. He remains a figment of our imagination, and I think it has something to do with that. The youngest president in American history at 42. He bursts onto the scene after the assassination of William McKinley, and he leads America in what will become the American century, right? So much change. He's born in 1858. No electricity, no cars. He will become the first president in an airplane, the first president in a submarine, the first president to travel in a motorcade by car. He does all of these firsts and really think of the society at that time. Think of American culture. You're changing from an agrarian to an industrial culture. You're moving from a rural to an urban culture. You're having rapid advancements in technology. You're having an intense debate about immigration and what it is to be an American. You're debating what America's place is on the world stage. Do any of these things sound familiar? Right?
And just 35 years before, you're in the Civil War.
Exactly. And he's the colonel who leads the charge up San Juan Heights and is, for the first time, reunite where blue and gray became red, white, and blue again. The Spanish-American War.
So were you drawn to Theodore Roosevelt?
I was invariably drawn by my childhood. I grew up in North Dakota. All right, there we go, North Dakota. So I grew up in North Dakota, and I would travel with my family to Theodore Roosevelt National Park almost every year on our trips out west. And we'll talk about it through the course of today, but it's a magical place. I mean, now when you grow up in North Dakota, to be fair, my North Dakotan friends out here, right? We've got Roger Maris. We've got Lawrence Welk, right? So TR was my guy. I went with TR.
And what was the name of your high school?
Let's see, it was the Red River Rough Riders. So when my wife and I have been married for 20 years, and I went back to my high school to speak after the launch of the book, and she's walking through the halls and going, oh, well, now I get it. I mean, this was inevitable, just Teddy on everything.
So they know that I like to ask the author about the title of the book. So why this book and why this title?
Well, the Loves of Theodore Roosevelt argues that the most masculine president in the American memory is actually the product of unsung and extraordinary women. I think we can. And I grew up with an image of Theodore as the masculine man, the self-made individual, the rugged individualist. And that's certainly true to a certain extent, but I had only heard about his mother, Mittie, his first wife, Alice, his second wife, Edith, his sisters, Bamie and Conie, as passing characters in the story. They were never central to his success. And it just dawned on me that, if we are all fortunate in our lives, we have a brother or a sister or a spouse or a colleague or a friend, somebody who picks us up and pushes us forward, especially when we're at our lowest points. And that was no different for Theodore Roosevelt. And to me, that was a very different story than I had been told. And it made TR, who sometimes can be that distant figure on Mount Rushmore, that kind of impossible standard. I mean, if you want to feel pretty bad about yourself, compare yourself to Theodore Roosevelt, right? The youngest president in American history, the first American to win the Nobel Peace Prize. He's the first president to hold a conference of governors in the White House. I mean, accomplishment after accomplishment, the River of Doubt, the African expedition, so many different things that he did in his life. It makes him sort of unreachable. But this, I think, the Loves of Theodore Roosevelt says, he too needed help. He needed people in his lives who believed in him and picked him up when he was down.
It's the other reason I love this book, because there are many great biographies of Theodore Roosevelt, even his own autobiography. But there was something unique about this book that resonated with me because of my family and how my family was there to support me, and mostly the women in my family. Mm-hmm. And that was about the family aspect of Theodore. And is that part of your book? Does that kind of fit into what you found?
Well, absolutely. I mean, when I started doing the research in 2018, 2019, I was going to write about Theodore Roosevelt's time in the West. I grew up in North Dakota, as I mentioned. He went to the Badlands at the lowest point in his emotional journey. He had lost his wife, lost his mother on the same day in the same house, and he fled to the Badlands to mourn and recover. And he recovered through nature, and I'm sure we'll talk a bit more about that. But as I was going through the research, I kept running into Bamie, his older sister, who's giving him strategic advice, who's making introductions. I kept running into Conie, his younger sister, who's a poet and an author, and she's his emotional support system. She's the outlet from which he can vent all of these emotional frustrations. And then I have a whole new perspective on Alice, his first wife. I mean, the late, great Edmund Morris, who wrote the Pulitzer Prize-winning Rise of Theodore Roosevelt, basically says the best service that Alice provided Theodore was dying, was leaving his life and kind of getting out of the way for his greatness. Well, that's not what I discovered. 24 love letters that had not been available to Edmund when he wrote his book were available to me in the writing of this book. Changes the perspective and story of Alice and her importance in TR's life. So the family is, for Theodore Roosevelt, family was the reason for his success. Without the women in his life, without his mother, his two sisters, and his two wives, I don't think we would know the name Theodore Roosevelt today.
It's a pretty bold statement. So when I read these books, I take my notes in the margin, and then I go back and fill out my questions. In this book, this is on the preface, the very first page of the book, and I wrote this at the very top. I said, "This may be the best preface ever read. I usually speed read through the preface to get to the start of the book. His preface is amazing. You will be intrigued from the first word to the last, I promise you. So let's start at the beginning.
Thank you.
Let's start with his childhood and with his mother and his upbringing. So tell us a little bit about that.
So Mittie Bullock Roosevelt is raised in Georgia, in Roswell, Georgia. She is actually the inspiration for Scarlett O'Hara in Gone with the Wind. Margaret Mitchell grew up around the corner and remembers going to the Bullock Mansion and seeing this extraordinarily beautiful, tempestuous, big personality woman, Mittie, who will become Theodore Roosevelt Sr.'s wife. So that is TR's mom. TR's mom has a big personality. She has these coy turns of phrase and this southern wit and charm. She actually introduces Theodore and her other children to the McGuffey readers. And the McGuffey readers have these phrases like the African proverb, speak softly and carry a big stick. So she's the source of all of these sayings. And when her husband dies unexpectedly at age 46 of cancer, which devastates TR, she says to her children, we need to live for the living and not for the dead. If you do not live a life of purpose, you will dishonor the memory of your father. So you think about the two things we really know about Theodore Roosevelt, his big personality, his way with words, and his ability to will himself through physical and emotional pain. Those both came from Mittie. And no other book has really ascribed Mittie's importance in, of course, it all starts with mom. I mean, it has to start with mom. And she, his father was a fascinating figure too. I mean, he deserves the credit he gets in history. He's a philanthropist. He's the co-founder of the American Museum of Natural History in New York, one of the founders of the Metropolitan Museum. He opens the first orthopedic hospital in New York City. He's a fabulously important person, and he has this important moment in adolescence. TR has been a sickly child. He's asthmatic. He lives his life through books and his imagination. He can't go outside. I mean, sometimes his asthma attacks are so bad that his mother, Mittie, will literally massage his chest until the blood comes out. And he has these recurring nightmares as a child that the devil is asthma. And when asthma takes him, the devil is coming to take his life away. I mean, the first words in The Loves of Theodore Roosevelt are, from the beginning, the survival of Theodore Roosevelt was very much in doubt. His mother believed that he was going to die before 4 or 5 years old. So she protected him. She cocooned him. She took him to salons and really made sure he couldn't get hurt. And then his father says at 12 or 13 years old, you have the mind, but you do not have the body. If you do not make your body, your mind cannot go as far as it can. He practiced a type of Christianity known as muscular Christianity. It's the beginning of the YMCA. It's the beginning of depictions of Jesus as a muscular, beefy figure. And it's the sound mind, sound body connection, because you're changing from an agrarian to an industrial society. Men are not able to show their worth and strength through feats of nature any longer. And so he kind of rejects his mother at this point and says, I believe what Dad is telling me, and you've coddled me too much through childhood. And then, of course, Dad will die at age 20, when TR is 20. So I think whatever exaltation he had of his father, it went to an even greater height because he was gone so soon, and really Mittie fell into the background, and her contribution to his life was lost.
And it seems like some of the other biographies kind of discount Mittie in some sense, that she was kind of overshadowed by, I think they called him Thee, right?
Yes, Thee.
And is that true?
Well, I mean, I think she was a force of nature, and in her time, she would have been more notable. But because Thee died, and the recollection was that everything that Thee did was more monumental or instructive than it perhaps was, and really that Mittie didn't want the attention, didn't want the, I mean, first of all, nobody knew that he was going to go on to be president of the United States, so these stories would be, even more important and better written. But I think that, Mittie also there's an interesting, I was talking with a fellow author about this, Betty Caroli, who wrote The Roosevelt Women, which is a compendium, almost little mini biographies of all the women in the lives of FDR and TR. So it's not one narrative, it's just a lot of vignettes. Wonderful book. And she said, my feeling on it is that Bamie and Conie, the daughters, TR's older and younger sister, Mittie knew that if she outshone them, that if she was this big personality, this beautiful, beguiling woman that everyone was attracted to, she couldn't allow her children, her daughters, to become their own independent women. And so she actually receded in some cases, put herself intentionally in the background, which I never got a chance to talk with him about it. But David McCullough in Mornings on Horseback writes a very different Mittie than Edmund Morris in The Rise of Theodore Roosevelt. And they were both doing the research at exactly the same time. Rise came out in 1979, and Mornings on Horseback came out in 1982. They're looking at exactly the same material, a lot of the material that I was looking at, and more letters have come to light since that time. And it's very clear Mittie is a formidable, intelligent, big personality. So I like Betty Caroli's theory that Mittie sort of intentionally took herself out of competition with her daughters so they could find their own way in the world.
And tell us how Bamie and Conie influenced Theodore during his youth.
Bamie is born in 1855. She's only 3 years older than Theodore, but she basically becomes a substitute mother. She is the one who moves Theodore into his dorm at Harvard. She's the one who insists it be on the second floor so it won't bother his asthma. She's the one with whom he corresponds during his college years. It's kind of fascinating. I would sometimes take 3 letters that were written. Every Sunday, Theodore would write home. He'd write a letter to his mother, and it would be, "Darling Motherline, I hope you're doing well, and please take care of yourself." And I'm, not the kind of letter you'd necessarily write to your mother. Then he'd write a letter to Bamie, and it was almost like Bamie was his mom. I'm studying hard, I'm working like a Trojan, I'm, done well on my exams. And then to Conie, his younger sister, the emotional outlet, he'd write, "I went tobogganing this weekend and had a grand old time with the girls." And that's actually what he was doing. So, they each, Eleanor Roosevelt put it best: when you wanted advice, you went to Bamie, TR's older sister. When you wanted sympathy, you went to Conie, TR's younger sister. Anybody who has siblings can probably recognize that there are different points and different purposes in each of your siblings and their relationship to you. And I think that all stems from childhood, where in childhood, Bamie became the protector, the substitute mother. She was constantly with the older people. And Conie was much more emotional and lively and sort of connected with TR in their
And kind of his
emotional.
publicist also.
And his publicist, yes. So the role that they eventually take on is Bamie, I say in the book, is really what Robert F. Kennedy was to John F. Kennedy. She begins to see around every corner. So here's just a brief list of some of the contributions Bamie made. Bamie is the one who suggests he be a civil service commissioner. Bamie is the one who suggests he first run for office. Bamie is the one who makes an introduction to the McKinley campaign that leads to be Assistant Secretary of the Navy. Bamie is the one who introduced him to the journalist who will make him famous as New York City Commissioner for all of his midnight walks. Bamie is the one who will introduce him to the journalist who will then cover his heroics in the Spanish-American War that make him famous and thus make him governor. Bamie had a home in Washington, D.C., 1733 N Street, just not too far from the White House, that became known in the press as the Little White House. So often would TR go there for consultation. She is the hidden hand. TR himself said that she is the feminine atlas on whose shoulders the whole world rests. Conie, and by the way, Alice Roosevelt Longworth will later say of Bamie, had she been a man, she, not Theodore, would have been president of the United States. And Eleanor Roosevelt is asked about that quote in the 1950s because, of course, Eleanor was the niece and knew them all very well, and she wholeheartedly agreed. She said, I think that's if 100 years later, Bamie would have been president. Conie, interestingly, she becomes his publicist, right? She sees that there are stories of the family that if the people fall in love with the Roosevelts as a family, her brother will be more effective as a politician. So she, over Edith's objections, will slip stories to the press of the antics in the White House, right? She's the reason we know that they took a pony into the elevator up to the second floor of the White House. She's the reason we know about Alice's snake. Alice, the daughter, would wear a snake, and the press would ask, well, why are you wearing a snake? And she'd say, well, this is Emily Spinach. And they say, well, who's Emily Spinach? And she'd say, well, I don't like my Aunt Emily, and I don't like spinach. Therefore, Emily Spinach. So we know all of this because of Conie, because she knew that was her most effective. One more great Conie story. When he's governor of New York, they took advantage of the misogyny of the era. So Conie would hold these breakfasts, and they'd invite the bosses to the breakfast. And eventually the bosses, Boss Platt in particular, would say, all right, everybody, now clear out. I want my time with the governor. And TR would say, well, certainly my sister can stay. I mean, she is but a woman, and she takes such interest in my affairs. The boss would say, all right, sure, she can stay. And she would knit in the corner and hear everything that they discussed. And when the boss left, TR and Conie would talk about his political and personal options. So influential was Conie during his governorship of New York that he later said, haven't we had fun being governor of New York? So one could have been president, the other was his co-governor. That's pretty influential.
So there's one other woman who is important to him that he meets as a young child. Tell us about her, Alice.
So Edie. So Edie Carew lives around the corner from the Roosevelts at 28 East 20th Street. And just to give you, if you're familiar with New York, this is Gramercy Park, and the elite have sort of begun to move uptown. And think about what a neighborhood this was. Edie's neighbor was another Edith, Edith Jones, and the Jones family would actually be the first family to move up to Park Avenue and Fifth Avenue, and that's the origin of the phrase "keeping up with the Joneses." And that Edith would actually get married, take her husband's name, and she is Edith Wharton. So Edith Wharton is the source of, so that's the neighborhood in which they're growing up. Edith Wharton, Edie Carew, Theodore Roosevelt, all within about 3 blocks of one another and around the same age. And so Edie is, she's had a harder childhood than TR and the Roosevelts. Her father is an alcoholic. He took over the family business too young. Their fortunes begin to decline. And Mittie sees in Edie a friend for her awkward, asthmatic son. And so she invites Edie over to become part of the Roosevelts' homeschool. They all go to homeschool together. And there's these kind of devastating remembrances of Edie where when the Roosevelt children will come to her house, she'll say, I have to hide my shabby toys. I'm so embarrassed that we don't have the resources of the Roosevelts. And she quickly becomes, she's the same age as Theodore's younger sister, Conie, so they are playmates. But Theodore and Edie immediately have a bond. They're both readers. Edie is a poet, writes a lot of poetry through her childhood. Everyone expects Theodore and Edie to become engaged and get married as they go through their childhood together. They are that inseparable, that close.
And there's so much to talk about. I'd love to talk about that part, but I want to jump ahead to college. But what we do need to say is they don't get engaged.
Yeah, very quickly, I'll say August 22nd, 1878. We don't know what happened. They have a big blowout fight, and they will never speak of it again but twice to others. And we need the Netflix adaptation of the Loves of Theodore Roosevelt to speculate why these two who were going to get married didn't, but they didn't.
So he goes off to college. He
Goes
goes
off
to
to
Harvard.
college. Yep.
And to me, we could talk about just those years when he's in college because it's very interesting. And he's a challenging person in college. Tell us what his classmates thought about him and what he wanted to be, what he thought he wanted to be when he got older.
Theodore Roosevelt was not the Theodore Roosevelt you know from Mount Rushmore in college. He was a geeky naturalist in whose wake formaldehyde lingered. He had specimens in various stages of decay in his pockets. The remembrances of his college classmates are so bad that early biographers just kept them out. They just said, well, I'm not going to write that. I mean, it took another 80 years for researchers to get into those interviews with his contemporaries, and they called him, I mean, these are quotes, eccentric, half crazy, oddity, oddball. I mean, he was known for yelling across the Harvard yard. You know, this is an era where, the Victorian era, where your manners and your composition are important, and he's just this ball of energy and eccentricity. He wanted to be a naturalist. He wanted to be a scientist, and there's two reasons he didn't. I suspect we're about to get into one of them.
Go right ahead. Yes.
Well, he breaks. So three things happen. One, 1878, very consequential year. His father dies in February of 1878. Absolutely devastates and crushes him. And he does this weird thing in his diary where he is pining for his father. He's saying, this is the greatest man I ever knew. I will never know someone more influential and better than my father. And then he'll very quickly shift tone. The only person who could ever replace him would be a wife. And he starts writing phrases from Edgar Allan Poe in his diary. He talks about how he wants to meet a rare and radiant maiden, quoting from The Raven, which is, Edgar Allan Poe is not a popular figure at this point, right? He is the bad boy of poetry in this time and has not reached the esteem he will later reach. So the fact that Theodore Roosevelt in college even liked Poe was interesting, and that he will use this as a way to think about his future wife is telling. So he loses his father. He breaks up with Edie, whom everyone expects he will marry. He goes back to school, and he meets Alice Hathaway Lee. And Alice Hathaway Lee is a bombshell. She is beautiful. She is the toast of the town. She's from the Cabot and Lee family, if you know the old Boston toast. And this is good old Boston, the home of the bean and the cod, where the Lowells talk only to the Cabots, and the Cabots talk only to God. She's a Cabot, right? So the idea that a geeky naturalist in whose wake formaldehyde lingers is going to win the most eligible bachelorette in Boston is absurd. I mean, everybody thinks he really is crazy. He's not half crazy, he's crazy. And he pursues her with a passion. 2 years, hundreds of thousands of dollars. He gets a horse and puts the horse in a stable. When he lames the horse because he's ridden the horse so hard, he gets a dog cart, which is the equivalent of a roadster. When he breaks the roadster, he walks the 12 miles round trip to Alice's house. I mean, he pursues her with a passion. And the other thing that happens is at this time, the Saltonstalls, the Lees, the Cabots, they're all progressive, reform-minded Republicans. They are all seeing politics as a means for social change. And so they begin to expose Theodore to this philosophy that his father was sort of into, but not completely. And what emerges in 1880, Theodore Roosevelt writes his senior thesis at Harvard on the practicability of men's and women's rights. He endorses suffrage 40 years before the 19th Amendment. He says that women should be doctors, lawyers, and judges. He says that women should not necessarily take their husband's name upon marriage, and that they should own their own property. These are radical ideas in 1880, all due to the introduction of Alice into his life. And finally, on February 14th, 1880, she agrees to marry him, and they announce their engagement to the world.
So tell us then how she influenced him after that.
Well, again, the history is written that she didn't influence him at all. And what I have found in the Loves of TR, 24 love letters that were not available to other prior historians. They show that they talked over everything from politics to poetry. He tests out what will later become his strenuous life speech on Alice in some of those letters. She is, she's so kind of outgoing and lively. She's known as Sunshine. That's her nickname. I mean, that gives you some sense of her radiance. She reminds me of Mittie, actually. I think she must have been much more like Mittie than Edith later on. And so she really begins, she encourages him to run for office. He wins. So they're only married 4 years. They're together 6 years total. And in that time, in Theodore Roosevelt's own words, he rose like a rocket. He wrote his first book, The Naval History of the War of 1812, which continues to be used at the War College to this day. He was elected to his first office, and he nearly got elected Speaker of the House in the New York State Assembly. And he attended but did not graduate Columbia Law School. The only thing he ever quit. Sorry, Judge. He decided it would be better to make the laws than to interpret the laws. So that's what he did with Alice. Pretty spectacular.
So I want to have you read part of one of the letters that he wrote to Alice. And it starts right here.
And then goes over, sure.
Goes over to this.
Absolutely. All right. Okay. Oh, my sweetest true love, pray for nothing, but that I may be worthy of you. You are the light and sunshine of my life, and I could never cease thanking the good God who gave you to me. I could not live without you, my sweet-mouthed, fair-haired darling, and I care for nothing, whatever else, but you. The canvass is getting along superbly. There seems to be a good chance of my election, but I don't care anyway. He loves her. He loves her.
So I hate to jump to this, but can you tell us about February 11th, 1884?
So February 11th, 1884, Theodore Roosevelt is a bit of a superstitious person. He believes inevitably their first child will be born on February 14th, Valentine's Day, the anniversary of their engagement. So he goes back to Albany, and he resumes his work as a legislator until he gets a telegram informing him on February 12th that the baby has been born. And then he gets a second telegram. Now, we don't know the contents of that second telegram. We only know Theodore Roosevelt's reaction to it from fellow assemblymen. His face went ashen white, and he dropped the telegram and ran from the New York State Assembly to the train station. There was a thick, dense fog that had descended over New York City, so it took him 5.5 hours to take what normally would have been a 2.5-hour train ride back to the city. The fog was so thick when he arrived in New York that he couldn't get a hansom cab. He had to walk through, again, the New York Times called it suicidal weather. And he reached 6 West 57th Street, the Roosevelt family home, where his brother had said, "There is a curse on this house. Mother is dying and Alice is dying too." He ran up to the 3rd floor, where he held Alice in his arms until 2:30 in the morning, when he was called to the 2nd floor, the bedside of his mother Mittie, and all of his brothers and sisters gathered around when she died of typhoid fever. Then he went back up to the 3rd floor, where he held Alice in his arms for 11 straight hours until 1:30 in the afternoon. She too died of Bright's disease, a kidney disorder that was exacerbated by the childbirth 2 days earlier. So in the same day, on the same house, Theodore Roosevelt lost his wife and his mother. He wrote an X in his diary and said, "The light has gone out of my life." He left his job in the New York State Assembly. He didn't stand for re-election, and he fled to the Dakota Badlands, where he lived for the better part of 2 years as a rancher and a cowboy.
But I want to just step back. So what happened with Alice, his daughter?
Alice, his daughter, was in the care of Bamie. So once again, the Atlas on whose shoulders the whole world rests. Bamie is the one who takes care of the baby for almost 3 years. And in fact, Theodore will, at the end, offer to Bamie that she take Alice forever. something Alice never forgets in later life. It's a longer story. And she sells the home at 6 West 57th Street and oversees the construction of Sagamore Hill. So Bamie, again, becomes a central character, and Bamie is the one who is basically saying to Theodore, you need to go recover in nature in North Dakota, but you have a life here in the East that needs to be fulfilled.
So I want to... It's almost hard to talk about anything after that. It's unimaginable.
Unimaginable.
Really.
Yeah.
But he takes something from Alice, and does he ever speak of her name again? People say he never spoke her name again. Is that
so
right?
This is the legend and lore that Theodore Roosevelt pushes Alice out of his life and out of his memory. It is not true. When I did the research for the Loves of Theodore Roosevelt at Sagamore Hill, we came across this almost Tiffany-like looking box, a blue-green sort of case, and inside we thought were going to be clippings of Alice's hair as a child, much like a parent would keep of their child at 8 or 9 months old or 8 years old. And indeed, that was in there, but there was a hidden compartment, and when we opened the hidden compartment, there were 16 inches of Alice Hathaway Lee's hair. And there was a note in TR's unmistakable handwriting, the hair of my sweet wife Alice cut after death. And all of his favorite photos of her that he kept hidden in this case in Sagamore Hill, hidden from his second wife Edith for the rest of his life.
So I think he made comments, I'm done, I'm never getting married, I'm never having another relationship.
And would have, at that time, the Victorian Code would have said you dishonored the memory of your lost wife or husband if you did remarry. So he was really struggling with this idea of remarriage. He's 25 years old. I mean, so to say I'm never getting married again was a profound statement.
But then he meets Edith again. Tell us about that.
Well, enter possibly Bamie and Conie. Bamie has Edie over for tea, and when TR is back in New York, coincidentally, gets the timing wrong. Edie shows up while Theodore is coming down the stairwell. They meet. They instantly fall back in love. Within 6 weeks, they're secretly engaged.
And tell us, though, how Edith and Alice are very dissimilar.
I don't think you could have possibly found 2 more different women for the same person to marry in the course of 6 years. I mean, Alice, outgoing, lively, her nickname is Sunshine. Edith, taciturn, quiet, reserved, a little judgmental at times. I mean, she referred to her children as her beloved shackles. She later referred to, she said of her she was asked about her grandchildren, and she said, well, I love to see their faces, but I prefer to see their backs. That's Edith. She's tough. She's tough. She doesn't suffer fools. But she's a tactician. She had a harder life. Remember, her father, alcoholism, the kind of shabby toys. She's on the outer edge of the inner circle. She's with the Roosevelts, but she's not a Roosevelt, right? And Bamie and Conie are the keys to Roosevelt's success. And so there was a lot of tension about whether, Edie was going to take this foremost place as his wife. And, Alice would come home, and when Teddy walked through the door, and by the way, she was the only one ever allowed to call him Teddy. That was her nickname for him. He hated being called Teddy after her death because it reminded him of Alice. And so his family knew to never call him that, but he didn't fight the political forces that called him that. He would come home and she would scream up the stairwell, Teddy is home, come and share him. Edith would say, I think we've seen enough of Bamie and Conie for the summer now, dear. So there was a difference in how they approached the family.
I think we forget that between the unfortunate death of Alice and his presidency, there was a long period of time. There was 15 years.
15 years. He only lives to age 60. And so 15 years, a quarter of his life, he does not hold elected office. And that is the time that from Alice's death to when he runs for governor of New York. And Edith didn't necessarily want him to go into politics. I mean, Edith didn't like politics. She didn't like sharing him with the world. If it were up to him, they would have lived an entirely different life. She didn't stop him, but she didn't encourage it either.
But it seems like once he made a decision, or they made a decision, she was a pretty big promoter of his and had incredibly excellent advice.
Well, I mean, he said it. Whenever I go against Edith's judgment, I regret it. And she is known as a ruthless judge of character. She's the one, she reads 4 or 5 newspapers every morning and sits with him and talks about what's in the news today. Every presidential appointment he made, he would run by Edith. Edith, let's just quickly, a minute of Edith, right? She's the first lady to have a social secretary. Every single first lady to this day has had a social secretary. So she creates the institutional office of first lady. She oversees the reconstruction of the White House by McKim, Meade, and White, and creates the East Wing and the West Wing. She creates what will become the personal office of the president and the residence. She creates the West Wing. She changes the name of the executive mansion to the White House and changes the stationery to the White House. She includes the First Lady's portraits begins to collect the china of all the previous administration, which begins the China collection. She plants a colonial garden, which will later become the Rose Garden. Her physical influence in the White House, hosts the first salons in the White House, the first time to have artists and musicians and poets to the White House, which then, of course, Jackie Kennedy will emulate in the 1960s. She's the source of all of this, in addition to being her husband's foremost counselor and advisor.
So everyone here will remember Anita McBride, who wrote the book Remembering the First Ladies, who we had here. And she talked about this, and she made the comparison in that book between Jackie Kennedy and Edith.
So the playbook that Jackie Kennedy followed was created by Edith Roosevelt.
So who was a better judge of character, Edith or TR?
Oh, Edith, 100%. TR was a politician. He wanted people to like him. Edith didn't care if you liked her or not. And Edith was the one who, really took pains to understand the motivations of people around TR. Edith burned almost all of the correspondence between she and her husband. So the reason we know about her influence is firsthand impressions. We have a number of people who worked for the administration, worked for the first couple, and talked about how influential. She said she had that way to smooth Theodore's tempestuous nature with a look or a glance or a touch that would just know what he, and they knew, she had known him since he was 3 years old. So think of that. They knew each other for 57 years of his 60 years of life. Who would have possibly known him better?
Right. So he becomes president when McKinley's assassinated, serves 3 years, runs for another term, and then doesn't run again. Why not?
And he makes the disastrous decision on the eve of his election to announce that he will not stand in 1908 for election as president. The Constitution has not yet been changed. He can stand for a third term. That is still that has now been changed, despite what you read in the news. You can't stand for more than 2 terms. Just trying to throw that out there. But in case there was a doubt, But in that time he could, and so TR says that he will not stand for re-election, and Edith is seen to wince. He didn't talk it over with Edith before he made that impulsive announcement, and again, anytime he didn't consult Edith, he usually made a mistake. The other time that she spoke truth to power was in 1912. Everyone is encouraging him to run. Bamie and Conie want him to run again. A lot of progressive reform-minded governors want him to run again. Edith is out horseback riding near Oyster Bay. A car pops and starts, startles her horse, knocks her clean off the horse. She's knocked completely unconscious. Today, it would be a traumatic brain injury. So while Edith is unconscious, Conie and Theodore conspire with 7 governors to write a public letter encouraging Theodore to run for president in 1912, and that's when he says, "My hat is in the ring," literally while Edith was unconscious. That's the only time he could have gotten away with it, because she said to him, as all of his advisors are saying, "Run, run, run," Edith said, "Put it out of your mind, Theodore. You will never be president of the United States again." She had a good read on the political situation and the reality of it. You know, when his presidency was over, she said, "I am so glad it is all over." And by the way, Theodore's last quote when he exited the White House, they said, "Is there anything you wish you had done as president?" He said, "Yes. I wish I had 16 lions to let loose on Congress." And they said, "Well, what if they ate the wrong people?" And he stopped and said, "Well, not if they stayed long enough."
So he has a great, Alice has he has a great quote about his daughter, Alice, while he's president. Will you tell us that quote?
So he says, "I can either run the country or I can control Alice, but I cannot possibly do both." And Alice gives as good as she gets. She says back, "Well, he loves to be the bride at every wedding, the corpse at every funeral, and the baby at every baptism." So she's pretty witty.
So I want to talk about his trip to Brazil and down the Amazon. And again, how the women in his life had something to do with that, primarily Edith, because she turns out to have made an incredible decision. Tell us about that.
Well, he says it's his last chance to be a boy, and Edith fears that he will kill himself, that he will do something so silly and dangerous that he won't come back to her. So Edith, convinces her son Kermit to go with him and to basically caretake TR on this trip. And that turns out to be a very prescient. If you've read Candace Millard's River of Doubt, which is absolutely extraordinary, it reads like a novel. It's a story not of survival, it's a story of a father and a son. It's a story of the lengths to which you will go to protect your child. What Candace writes about so beautifully in that book, and I tried to capture in brief in The Loves of TR, is that, you know, Theodore says famously he gets malaria and he is hallucinating. He's repeating poetry and he thinks he's going to die. And he basically says, "Leave my bones in South America." And then has a realization that because he thinks he'll be a drag on the party and endanger them all, then realizes if he doesn't let Kermit, his son, save him, Kermit will never forgive himself. The life that Kermit will live if he loses his father in South America after his mother has specifically sent him there to make sure he comes home, not possible, right? And that's indeed what saves his life. So Edith, in a way, knew exactly what he was going to need on the River of Doubt to survive.
So unfortunately, he dies young at age 60. And if I could get you to read this poem that Conie wrote, and maybe you can kind of set it up.
Absolutely.
It goes to the next page.
So the family knew that Theodore Roosevelt was not well. He had been in and out of the hospital. I'll just briefly mention on November 2nd, 1918, Theodore Roosevelt delivered the last speech of his life. On stage was W.E.B. Du Bois. It was a mixed-race audience. He spoke in front of mixed-race audiences often. And in this speech, he gave a full-throated endorsement of civil rights and equality between black and white, such that people thought that were he to win the nomination in 1920, he would have stuck a dagger in the heart of Jim Crow 45 years before the Civil Rights Act. So the progressive arc of TR is pretty remarkable. The only thing he regrets is that he didn't do more when he had the power to do it. And so he's the leading contender for the Republican presidential nomination in 1920. And he has told the Republican Party, this time you will take me as I am. I will not adjust one issue to your satisfaction. And so he's gearing up for one last fight. His son, Quentin, who's only 19 years old, has died in World War I, and it crushed TR. He'd extolled his children to go to battle, to go to World War I, and one of them has died. And this is the youngest who had grown up in the public eye in the White House. So it's really quite profound. And so unexpectedly to the world, but expectedly to his family, he dies on January 6, 1919. And Conie, his sister, was who goes into the room with the body of her brother and wrote this poem entitled Sagamore. At Sagamore, the chief lies low, above the hill encircled row. The whirring airplanes dip and fly, a guard of honor from the sky. Eagles to guard the eagle, woe is on the world. The people go with listless footstep, blind and slow. For one is dead who shall not die at Sagamore. O land he loved, at last you know the son who served you well below. The prophet voice, the visioned eye, hold him in ardent memory. For one is gone who shall not go from Sagamore.
So not only are we delighted you're here for this book, but I want to talk about one other thing, that you are the CEO of the Theodore Roosevelt Presidential Library. And maybe you could just tell us about that. I'm going to see if I can do this and get it up.
Yes. So for the past 5 years, while writing the book, my day job has been as the CEO of the Theodore Roosevelt Presidential Library. We've raised $350 million to build this, a Snøhetta-designed building. Snøhetta is the architect of the 9/11 Museum in New York. They designed the San Francisco Museum of Modern Art, not too far from here. It's 93 acres where we are inviting the people to come and not just come into a presidential library and museum, but to get out in nature. There's a walkable roof where you can get a 360-degree view of the Badlands, 65 million years of geologic history spreading out before you like a textbook. You can hike, you can bike, it'll be the only presidential library you can ride a horse to. And it's under construction now. We are as of the end of November, we will be 95% complete. And we open to the world on July 4th, 2026, the 250th anniversary of America.
So I know we're out of time, but I thought the best way to end would be with your writing, and if you could read that last paragraph.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So this is from the prologue, and thank you for your very kind words, Doug. I hope my wife recorded them so I can just repeat them when needed. So, we are, all of us, the product of those who believed in us. Sometimes it's a brother or sister, our parents, a friend, a teacher, a mentor, or even a stranger. More often, it's a combination of some or all of these. Theodore Roosevelt's life is frequently held up as an example of resilience and willful determination, sui generis and well-nigh supernatural. I do like and admire that picture of TR, but it is mistaken. He had help, and I like Theodore Roosevelt even better, knowing that he needed help from his family and friends. Mittie, Bamie, Conie, Edith, and Alice were as much a part of Theodore Roosevelt's success as his almighty autochthonous will. Maybe now the time has finally come in which we can more fully appreciate these women in the arena. Thank you so much. That was great.
Excellent.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
Coming back.
Thank you, James. Thank you.